Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are diving into a huge new EU plan that's about to completely change the buildings we live and work in every single day. We're talking about Directive 2024/1275, and trust me, it's a big deal.
So let's just start with a big question. We talk a lot about cars and factories when it comes to climate change. But what if our homes, our offices, what if they're actually one of the single biggest pieces of the problem? Well, the EU thinks so, and this new directive is their answer.
And here's why. Get this. In the EU, buildings are responsible for a massive 40% of all the energy we consume, and that translates to 36% of our energy-related greenhouse gas emissions. That is a huge number, making our buildings a massive target for change.
Okay, so here's how we're going to break this all down. First, we'll look at the problem itself. Then, we'll get into the EU's really ambitious vision for 2050. We've got to decode some new lingo, some key terms you'll be hearing a lot. Then, we'll walk through the official timeline, see how this whole plan becomes reality, and finally, what it all means for you and your building.
All right, let's start with the big why. Why do our buildings need this kind of radical change? It really boils down to a couple of core issues. At the very heart of it is just plain inefficiency. A staggering 3/4, 75% of all buildings in the EU are basically leaking energy. Just imagine that for a second. 3 out of every 4 buildings just wasting heat, wasting electricity, day in and day out. That's the scale we're dealing with.
And to make it worse, look at how we're heating them. We are still so dependent on fossil fuels. Natural gas alone makes up almost 40% of the energy we use to heat our homes. You add in oil and coal, and it's over half. This is exactly the dependency the EU wants to break.
So, facing a problem this big, what's the solution? Well, the EU's answer is bold. It's a complete reimagining of what a building even is in the 21st century.
The directive sets a goal that is powerful and crystal clear. Right there in the text, it says the vision is a decarbonized building stock by 2050. So we're not talking about small improvements here. This is a top-to-bottom transformation of pretty much every building out there.
And this is where you can really see how ambitious this is. The EU is officially moving on from the old standard, the nearly zero-energy building. The new gold standard is the zero-emission building, or ZEB, and the difference is absolutely critical. The old way was about being highly efficient. The new way? It's a hard line, zero carbon emissions from fossil fuels on site, period. That means no more gas boilers, no more oil furnaces. That's the game changer.
All right, to really get this plan, you have to speak the language. The directive introduces some new concepts that are super important. Let's break down the 3 biggest ones.
First up, the absolute cornerstone of the whole thing, the zero-emission building, or ZEB. This is the new North Star. It's the standard for all new buildings and for any major renovations. And the key isn't just being efficient, it's getting rid of those on-site fossil fuel emissions completely.
And the official language here is incredibly specific for a good reason. By focusing on zero on-site carbon emissions, it's pointing directly at the source of the problem inside our homes and offices. The gas boilers, the oil furnaces, this wording makes it impossible to fudge the numbers. The energy used right there in the building has to be 100% clean.
Next up, we have deep renovation. Now, this is not your average weekend DIY job. A deep renovation is a project that's so thorough, it actually turns an old existing building into a brand new zero-emission building. It's a complete energy overhaul.
And finally, there's the renovation passport. The easiest way to think about this is like a personalized, step-by-step game plan for a building. It maps out a clear path to get to that deep renovation status, making the whole thing feel way more manageable.
So how does this all play out? Well, this grand vision isn't just some far-off dream. It's backed by a very real roadmap with some very firm deadlines. Let's check out the key dates, because some of them are coming up really fast.
As you can see, it's a very methodical, step-by-step process. It kicks off as early as 2025, when they end subsidies for new fossil fuel boilers. Then by 2028, new public buildings have to be ZEBs. By 2030, that applies to all new buildings. Then the plan shifts to fixing the existing buildings, using these minimum energy performance standards to force upgrades on the worst offenders, all leading up to that 2050 goal.
The year 2030 is going to be a massive turning point.
From then on,
Any new building has to be a zero-emission building. No excuses. At the same time, they start the big cleanup of existing commercial buildings, targeting the bottom 16%, the absolute worst energy hogs. They've got to be upgraded. And, to top it off, solar panels will become standard on new homes wherever it's practical.
And the momentum doesn't stop. Just 3 years later, by 2033, the bar for existing commercial buildings gets raised again. Now the requirement expands to the worst-performing 26%. So you see the strategy here, right? They target the worst of the worst, get them renovated, and then move on to the next group, systematically raising the energy performance for the entire country.
Okay, a roadmap is great. But how does this actually happen in the real world? How does the EU get millions and millions of buildings renovated? Well, the directive comes with a whole toolkit designed to make it happen.
That renovation passport we mentioned is a huge part of the how. It's designed to take what feels like a massive, overwhelming project and break it down into easy, manageable stages. You start with an assessment, you get a clear roadmap, and it guides you step by step, making that journey to a ZEB feel a lot more possible.
And this is so important. The directive knows that you can't just order this kind of change. You have to enable it. So it requires countries to set up a real support system. We're talking one-stop shops where building owners can get all their technical, financial, and admin questions answered in one place. It also means targeted financial help to make sure vulnerable families aren't left behind. It's a system built to help everyone get on board.
So this isn't just some abstract policy document. It is going to have real direct effects on homeowners, on developers, on public officials all across the EU. So let's talk about what this means for you.
Let's just break it down. If you're a homeowner, you'll really need to think about energy performance with any future renovation. And you might even use one of those renovation passports to plan it out. If you're a developer, well, starting in 2030, you're only building zero-emission buildings. That's your new reality. And if you're a public official, you're the one who's going to be implementing all this, upgrading public buildings, and setting up those support systems for everyone else.
And that brings us to our final thought. This directive isn't a suggestion. It's a fundamental change in how we build, how we renovate, and how we live. The move to a zero-emission building stock is now officially underway. So the question really isn't if this is going to happen, but how you're going to be a part of it. What's the first step your building can take?